you're piling into the Zoom. We'll probably have a few people being let in after the start time, so you'll have to bear with us. So my name is Jessica Goldfinch. I'm co-chair of Green Party Women, and I'm here tonight with Lexi Ellingsworth of Stop Surrogacy Now UK. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We will be taking questions later on after Lexi has done her presentation. If you can use the drop-down menu in the chat and address those questions to Elizabeth, she should appear in the first drop-down, then Liz will then collate the questions. There'll probably be a few repetitions, so we'll try and get through as many as possible. And then we will be able to get to those towards the end. The other issue is we are recording, as you know, and that's for people who perhaps haven't made it tonight, and they will be able to see an edited recording. We'll just chop off the beginning and the end to make a proper recording. And there will be links later on that Lexi will share with us that we will then share in the Green Party Women's next newsletter of any resources, and obviously any questions that come in afterwards, we can get those addressed as well. So I'd like to start just by way of introduction that, and I'm going to read it directly from my screen. Lexi has worked for non-profit organisations throughout her career, from the Global Campaign for Education and Mary Stopes International, to more recently the human rights charity Sex Matters. Along with her co-founder, she launched Stop Surrogacy Now UK in 2019, and she works alongside other campaign groups such as Surrogacy Concern, Nordic Model Now and Object Now. Since the Law Commission published their report in 2023, other groups in Ireland and Scotland have formed, and the international rejection of surrogacy is now growing. Stop Surrogacy Now UK have a number of concerns with the current law and law reform, and they seek to raise awareness of the realities of surrogacy, including the medical risks, surrogacy regret, the exploitation of women, and the commodification of children. And before Lexi starts, from a personal point of view, I'm now 58, so I suppose when I was younger, I used to see a very supportive of surrogacy, because I used to see it as a very familial thing, something that maybe a sister would do for a sister or her brother, and that everyone would know and be around the child. So the child would still be at the centre of perhaps a loving act, an act of benevolence and altruism towards our family. And I think as I've grown older, I've taken a complete 180. And I think perhaps it's simply because you see some of the consequences. So despite it really rings a bell with Green Party policy about our rights and responsibilities, so we might feel we have a plethora of rights, but we also have to check our responsibilities with regard to other people around us and the effects that we have. And I see surrogacy as no different from that. So if you're okay to start, Lexi, it's
Yes.
a real pleasure to have you here tonight. I know it's a difficult subject for some people and quite controversial, but I think with an open presentation, and maybe people want to suggest other people who don't feel the same as Stop Surrogacy, we can also hold meetings, webinars about that as well if they want to get in touch. So over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction, Jess. And thank you for having me here this evening, and hello to everybody who's watching. So yes, my name is Lexi Ellingsworth. I'm co-founder of Stop Surrogacy Now UK. I'm going to whiz through this fairly quickly so that we can get to the questions. So I always think that's the more interesting bit, but yeah, let's go over some of the sort of background here. Can you all see my screen okay? Can you give me a thumbs up, Jess, if you can see everything clearly? Great. Okay. So who are we? We are basically a campaign group that launched in 2019 in response to the Law Commission doing a public consultation that it sought to liberalise domestic surrogacy law here. And as Jess explained, we campaign with alongside other groups such as Surrogacy Concern, Nordic Model Now, who've done amazing work on this, and Object Now. And since we've launched, other campaigns in Scotland and Ireland have also joined us. So that's been really good to obviously we sort of support each other. The main campaign aims that we have is to encourage critical thinking and analysis of surrogacy. So it's really great that we're here this evening so we can obviously talk about it and have a discussion. We want to challenge the media bias and draw attention to relevant research. And I don't know if anyone saw or has been following us, but there was a sort of story that was covered in the Times, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, and that was about an older couple obtaining a baby from a woman in California and bringing the child back to the UK and then getting their parental rights approved. So we try to highlight these stories so that people can see exactly what it is that's happening. And we also draw attention to this research. And there is a bit of a scarcity of research in this area. But one study that came out, I would like to mention, it came out last year from Canada. And it was a really large study. It was over 860,000 births. And of that, it was over the space of 10 years. So of that, they had 806 of those births were for surrogacy purposes. And the study, you know, they leveled out some information. So they omitted cases or women who were pregnant and had a history of cancer. They omitted multiple births, and they also had an issue with the validating of insurance. So there were some things that they had to sort of take out. But what they found was that the level of risk in surrogacy pregnancy is actually threefold than naturally conceived or IVF pregnancies. So it's really quite shocking. Obviously, that's a large scale study and it backs up previous studies. One of the things that this Canada study, so they basically found out that there was an increased risk of sepsis, pre-eclampsia and postpartum hemorrhage. And then there's other studies that have shown that there's, in addition to that, there'll be hyperemesis gravidarum, which is that extreme morning sickness, anemia, increased risk of ectopic pregnancy, increased risk of placenta abruption, high blood pressure, and also a risk of more difficulties during the pregnancy and of preterm birth. And that's a study from 2022. So we've got research in this area from the last decade or so, and they all come out with a meta-analysis of that increased risk of ×3. And then another thing that we do is to raise up the voices of surrogate mothers. I did a blog on this, I think about a week ago. It's our most latest blog you can see on our blog page. And it's really difficult to do. And I think if you read that blog, you'll understand why. But, you know, there are women who basically are unable to speak because they have been told by judges that they can't. So, you know, that is something that is an issue. Our objections to surrogacy, I mean, it's quite wide, but these are basically the sort of three key things. It always involves separating a newborn from their mother at birth. That just happens in every single case. So that's whether that's an altruistic surrogacy or a commercial surrogacy. Obviously, we understand a lot about mother-baby bonding and the fourth trimester, and you know, this separates that bond at birth. Altruistic surrogacy isn't what it seems. Money changes hands, and I've got a slide later on that sort of looks at the two, and we'll look at that later. But commercial surrogacy is illegal in the UK, but it is practiced because obviously people go abroad to buy babies, and then they, like I say, with that older couple, they just come back into the UK. As long as there's a genetic link and they're domiciled in the UK, you know, they can go to the UK courts, they can apply for parental order, go to the UK courts, have that approved, and they're granted their parental rights, and that's secured. So with a brief history, so I always start with this, the test tube baby, it's Louise Joy Brown. She doesn't like being called the test tube baby. I think actually it wasn't a test tube at all. I think it was a Petri dish. But regardless, like that's something that she doesn't like, but it is what people recognise. That was obviously like the beginning of IVF. And it was originally Mr. and Mrs. Brown's gametes that were, you know, conception took place outside of the body, and then Mrs. Brown obviously gave birth to her daughter Louise. Later on, we had the Warnock report. There were 64 recommendations of that in that report. Broadly, the Warnock report rejected surrogacy on ethical grounds, and what they did specify was that contracts cannot be enforceable, which is really important here in the UK, and it prohibited commercial surrogacy, but it did not criminalise anybody who was involved. And then in 1985, baby Cotton was born, but also we had the Surrogacy Arrangements Act as a result of the Warnock Report and of the birth of baby Cotton as well. So this was a lady called Kim Cotton, who was the UK's first surrogate mother, and she runs COTS, and she still runs COTS. COTS is childlessness overcome through surrogacy. It's an agency in the UK. It's the first one. So it's obviously the oldest, and it's actually closing down later on this year. But Kim Cotton has opened up a consultation business. So that will carry on in a different sense. So then 5 years later, a new law was put in place. That was the HFEA Act, and that was when the sort of specified that we needed to have some regulation, and it was the Human Fertility Embryology Authority that was formed in 1991, and they regulate clinics. It's said in the Law Commission's proposals that the HFEA would be responsible for regulating the RSOs, which are so they're the regulated surrogacy organisations, and they would be in charge of this as a new area of their remit. They actually reject this. The HFEA reject this. They say that they don't have the funding or the expertise to manage it, but that's just something more about their submission a bit later. 2 years later, we had the Brazier Report, which suggested tighter regulations on surrogacy. This was done under Labour. They suggested that they recognise these organisations, these agencies, as the Law Commission reform said so as well. And quite similarly, they said that they weren't looking at a ban, and the Law Commission said that as well. And then non-profit agencies, as I've been speaking about, they were legalised in 2008. And then the Law Commission had their consultation in 2019, which is when we formed in direct response to that. And it was in March that 2023 that the Law Commission of England and Wales and the Scottish Law Commission published their report and the draft bill. That was also when Surrogacy Concern launched. So key proposals within the consultation document and then basically the report are that there's expenses were permitted with no cap. They're basically kind of recategorized, but holidays and gifts are permitted. They have an alternative model and a preferred model of how commissioning parents are named on birth certificates, and their preferred model is that this is done, you know, they don't have to apply for that. So it's just an automatic that their names are put on the birth certificate, and that the surrogate mother isn't named. And the surrogate mother has less time to change her mind. So currently, you cannot apply for a parental order until the child is 6 months old. But in this new model or new pathways, they call it, you basically have parental rights at birth, but the surrogate mother can withdraw her consent. So it's almost like flipped around. She can withdraw her consent up to and including 6 weeks. So she can withdraw her consent up to and including birth, and then she basically has to lodge a legal claim within 6 weeks of the birth. And I think many listening tonight will know that the first 6 weeks, once the baby's born, your hormones, is that the time to be looking for legal counsel and have money to, do all of that. So that's a significant change. And then the RSOs, as I said, they're the regulated surrogacy organisations. They're basically the agencies. They would have responsibility. They would be given, so instead of CAFCAS being involved, they would be the ones who are looking at the commissioning parents. And, obviously they don't have the sort of experience that CAFCAS has. And then the final thing would be that the advertising ban is lifted. So I don't know if anyone saw, but fairly recently on Twitter, we were sort of highlighting how advertising is targeting young women. And I think it's Southampton University that had a clinic basically at their sort of freshers fair or at an exhibition within the building, showing their wares. And also their advertising was shown at a bus stop. And it says, be a hero, be an egg donor, help a family, make dreams come true. That's permitted, that's all allowed under the law. And we could expect to see something similar to that, but obviously with surrogacy agencies or surrogacy organisations, as they would be called, basically being allowed to advertise in that same way. And a bit more on the proposals. So there's no upper age limit for CPs, so that's commissioning parents, by the way. I don't use the language of the surrogacy industry. So they would say intended parents, and I say commissioning parents because that is the legal language, but also it's you are commissioning a child to be born. You're deliberately setting about conception and for the purpose of the child to be born. So you're essentially commissioning that service, quote unquote, from the woman who is pregnant and going to give birth to the baby that you have deliberately set about to be created and conceived. And SMs is obviously surrogate mothers. So the minimum age for a surrogate mother would be 21, and the commissioning parents would have to be 18. Obviously, that's both of those ages are very young. Surrogate mothers can continue to conceive with her own egg. So just to give a very quick thing, you have two different types of conception, methods of conception with surrogacy. So that's basically IVF or, using your own egg where you get pregnant naturally, not usually through sexual intercourse, but through artificial insemination. So that can be a preferred method for people who want to save money. And if you don't go to the clinics, then there's that level of safeguarding that is removed from the process. You basically just go to each other's houses and it's all done privately. And then there's no change actually in the reform proposals for the parental order system as it exists now to be changed. So you'd have this new pathway where you get parental rights at birth and all of these things are laid down in the law. And you could still go abroad to get a baby if you would prefer to do that. The Law Commission actually say that they want that to remain as well. They say they have a whole section on it in their core report, which is all available online. I can send through the links obviously later. But I thought it was very interesting that there was no real attempt to prevent the exploitation that happens, and they know that it happens and they acknowledge that it happens, but they still wanted this parental order system to remain. So whilst there's an argument to say that we need law reform so that we can control and regulate here domestically, there's nothing to stop that continuing, even in the law reform proposals that we have after all of these years of this project. So what's the difference between commercial surrogacy and altruistic surrogacy? Well, I would say there isn't really much of a difference. The level of money, but in terms of like practically what happens, the baby is removed from the mother at birth in every single surrogacy arrangement, whether that's within a family or between friends or between strangers who've met on the internet or strangers who've been matched by an agency or set up and matched internationally. Some of you might have seen what I say about Facebook baby shopping on the Twitter page, because that's also a method of basically getting a baby from a woman in a different country, Nigeria, and various other countries. It's really kind of out of control. Money changes hands, and whether that's expenses, it's basically meant to be reasonable expenses in the UK, but agencies will often refer to it as compensation, which I think is one of these language things. It's quite confusing because compensation is usually something that you would get if there was like an accident or medical negligence or something similar. And then surrogate mothers, women who usually engage in surrogacy, they can do it because they want to help. And you could do that whether you are doing it for money as well, or whether, it's your best friend and, you've had children and she hasn't been able to have children, like you want to help her. So the help reason or motivation is basically the same. I was listening to a podcast earlier today, and it was to do with international surrogacy. So that's an agency that's here in the UK, and they have a branch in Mexico. And it was a UK couple, and they were talking about the surrogate mother's reasons for doing it. And they said that, it is financial, but she wants to help. And, that can basically be the basis for both types of surrogacy. The level of surrogacy for altruistic, the level of expenses, sorry, for altruistic surrogacy in the UK is roughly £15,000 to £20,000. And I think many of us here will understand that that's not what it costs to have a child. The sort of money and what's included, it's loss of earnings of a partner, it's your loss of earnings if you're working, if you can't go to work. The idea is that you're not out of pocket, but it can be that, you know, you can have a gardener, you can have a cleaner, you can have domestic services, childcare, and like I say, you know, gifts and what they call recuperative holidays can also be included both now and under reform proposals. So just on consultation submissions, obviously I submitted, that's actually before I formed this campaign, but Nordic Model Now were there well before us, and did an excellent template that over half of the responses received were the Nordic Model Now template, and they rejected the proposals. They also did this open letter that, you know, lots of people signed. It was organisations and individuals, as you can see. Other individuals and other group responses also rejected the proposals, and called for a ban, but the Law Commission said that the ban was not within the remit of their project. And that's a bit like the Brazier report, you know, because they said that the ban wasn't something that they were considering. And then some quotes from submissions. So like I say, all of the submissions are available online. I think there's about 9 bundles that are on the website, and you have to scroll through them like it's, you know, painful work to kind of go through and read them. So here are some quotes that I pulled. And, you know, Kafka said that not everybody applies for a parental order. HFEA said that there was, it was, you know, outside of their remit essentially, and they had concerns about legal disputes, like what would happen with their involvement. Something else that I wanted to mention actually about the HFEA, I've got this quote written down, and it's about advertising, because one of the things they said in their submission was that they were concerned of the advertising ban being lifted. And it says here, the removal of the ban on advertising in respect of surrogacy might constitute significant cultural change for the UK, which would attract considerable public interest and perhaps criticism, of which the regulator would naturally be the focus. And I agree with them. And then Maternity Action expressed concerns. Filia considers it a human rights violation, and ProGrar, which is basically social workers, they wrote a whole report about their concerns on law reform. So just to wrap up, what can you do? So you can like and share, obviously, our tweets, you can subscribe to our blog, and you can follow us online. I've got something more on that on just the next page, but I wanted to mention that Surrogacy Concern have 2 letters on their website. And again, I can send this link through to be shared later, but they are letters about egg donation, about the concerns for the age of women who are being targeted. There's a lack of research. The payment went up last October to just under £1,000. And we also have a letter on there. So Surrogacy Concern host it, but we obviously work very closely together, and that letter could go through to your MP. You just select a drop down, and it's one of those quick templates that you can do. And these are our social media handles where you can find us. Like I say, you can subscribe to our blog on our website, and you can email me.
Wow, thank you very much. Again, I've sort of come from a space where I've turned, like I said, 180 degrees on this, and I've still learnt something tonight, and it's a lot of food for thought. I was just thinking in terms, before we get to the questions, because I did want to kick off with one question that did come through quite a few times. So, but just so that any Green Party members here, if you want to find any policy on surrogacy, we don't have it directly, but under our fertility section from HE 800 to HE 803, it acknowledges, let me just get on the screen, it acknowledges aspects of fertility, but I did a word search and I can't see the word surrogacy anywhere, but it's not outside the realms of possibility when it's talking about IVF and storage of oocytes and sperm.
embryos.
Yeah, thank you. So let me just get back here to the Zoom. Sorry, I'm a bit old school. So one of the questions before Liz couches them is that it's quite clear. Obviously, we talk about women's autonomy and the rights over their own body. So quite literally, what's Surrogacy UK's response to women who will say, "Well, it's my body, it's my choice"?
So that's a common one. It's one that I've heard a lot of, and I think it's one of those slogans. Obviously, it's that slogan is from sort of like, what is that, the 60s, where it's relating to reproductive choice, and it's really unfortunate actually it's really upsetting actually. I think that has been hijacked by something that's called reproductive justice. So reproductive justice is not just about access to free or affordable, safe abortion. It's actually to do with IVF for all. So when I say IVF for all, that's, sometimes people talk about that, with the postcode lottery and being able to get funding and access on the NHS, but it's more than that, because obviously same-sex couples cannot reproduce, naturally, and can't even with IVF using their own gametes. They would need to have a third party involved in terms of conception, and then there's another party, obviously the clinic, who would be creating embryos for implantation. Now, if you are a lesbian couple, it's very different to being a gay male couple, as I think we all understand. And the slogan, obviously, it goes with abortion, and as you said in the it's a subject really close to my heart, to be honest, because I work for Mary Stopes International. And I think my answer to it is basically the wording, my body, my choice. When it comes to surrogacy, it's actually my body, their baby. Now, I wouldn't say it's my body, their choice, but there's a bit of a grey area here. So when it's my body, their baby, if that woman with her body wanted to terminate the pregnancy, it's already complicated. Like, it's already a very difficult decision. It's not taken lightly, but it involves other people. So if that embryo that was implanted, and that's the last egg that your sister had, or you're doing this for a same-sex male couple, and they spent a lot of money on an egg donor, on an egg from a woman from abroad, maybe, depending on obviously what's import and all the rest of it. But if you are carrying a child that's not yours, which is what surrogate mothers say to themselves, we have a bigger question about ownership. And so that's why I say it's my body, their baby, because it's not as straightforward as saying my body, my choice. And I think then we get into kind of conversations about who owns the genetic material and how much of it is like, how much would you think, okay, well, look, I'm finding this pregnant, I want to end this agreement, but it's only a few more months, maybe I could carry on, maybe the hyperemesis gravidarium, like maybe I could just carry on with it for a bit longer, and then it will all be over. And then I think, there is a really good quote, and I wrote it down. Your right to swing your fist ends where my nose begins. And we have body autonomy in this country, and so we should, and I'm very pleased that we do. But children have rights when they're born, because they're human beings. We have human rights, and they have rights under the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, which is ratified. And you can do what you like with your own body, but you can't do what you like with somebody else's body. We don't sell children. If we have a child and you want to have that child adopted, we have a process for that. That is very sad. It's very complicated. It's very emotional for everybody involved, and the children as adults can talk about that, and they are talking about that, and we're hearing from them. So I think it's one of those things that's said, I think, using feminist principles and speaking about them in a way where women have body autonomy, and I'm not saying that should change, but I think it's not as simple as that. And I think actually I have spoken to Surrogacy UK about this, and I think they have, we've had some back and forth on this, and they might say that, you know, a decision could be based on guilt, or it could be that, you know, it's an emotional process, and it's not as simple as, you know, her saying, right, well, I want to go to Mary Stopes Clinic and terminate this pregnancy, because it's not just about her, and it should be. And I think they support that. I think agencies support that, but I'm just saying that it's not as simple as it being her decision. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yes. I mean, we could probably go all night.
Yeah.
This is like a majorly big ethical quagmire. I can see that. And maybe we could do some more down the line, a bit more discursive, because obviously you've done a presentation and that's sort of less of a debate, more one way.
Absolutely.
But we could certainly come back, and if there's you know, people would like that, we can arrange that. Liz, can I now hand over to you, please? You've been fielding the questions. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
I felt like I went really dark, so I've just put my light on so it looks a bit brighter here.
Great. So I've had a couple of questions have come through from Loppy, and these are about studies. So maybe we'll start with those. So Loppy says, are there any studies of the effect of surrogacy on surrogate children psychologically and physically up until adulthood?
Okay, well, that's really interesting. So the answer is yes, there are studies. In fact, I know of one. It was done in Bristol with, so actually I've got it here. So there were 25 children aged between 8 and 17, so heading towards legal adults. This study included children who were born from surrogacy, and of that other children of that age group, and they might have somebody in their family who had been a surrogate mother. But of that 25, only 7 were surrogate born children. So that's a very, very small sample size. What I thought was quite interesting with what they concluded was some of the children thought that it was only via IVF, and they didn't understand that maybe the surrogate mother is using her own egg. And, you know, they sort of like it was interesting what they were saying about who the mother was. Like, if the mother who gives birth isn't a mother, and actually obviously they're children, but this is the law. If you give birth, you're a mother. And actually in the law it says mother and no other, meaning that a woman who has donated her egg is not the legal mother, and that's an important thing in the law. And that they said that I think 18 of 20, it says 18 said that the surrogate mother shouldn't be able to change her mind. Older participants spoke about advocating for surrogacy to normalise it and remove stigma, and being born from surrogacy makes them special. And, you know, not having wider contact, there should be basically this understanding that they shouldn't necessarily be in contact with the surrogate mother or her family because they're not their family. So it was actually very revealing, the study, but like I say, it was a very, very small sample size. In terms of adults, again, there's no real research in this area, but there is Olivia Morell, who is the spokesperson for the Casablanca Declaration, and she has spoken out, and I will send a link which will it's a YouTube link for her speech to the Czech Republic, to the government. She's written a book, she's speaking out, and I mean, her story is just traumatic. It's traumatic to listen to what's happened to her and how she found out, and you know, all she's doing now is you know, fighting against it as we are.
Okay, so and I have another question from Loppy, which is, what effect does the egg harvesting have on young women's bodies?
Again, we don't really know. There's not enough research. Research for women is already, I think a lot of us will understand, it's already really underfunded. But we know that government have, you know, increased this payment. It's called expenses again, but it's essentially a payment to women who donate their eggs in the UK. And there's no long-term research. I mean, the best thing that I could refer guests here tonight too is a book called Egonomics by Dr. Diane Tober. It was based on, I think, a 10-year study. It was done in the US and Spain, comparing the two models. I've read the book. It's fascinating. It's disturbing. It's detailed but very readable. It contains a lot of testimony from women who have donated their eggs. One thing that I found fairly disturbing is that in America, the market there basically allows people to look for elite egg donors and to seek out women who have a particular skill or attribute. So I think the story was that there was a couple who were looking for a woman who was, a genius musician. I'm not sure of the term. Is it virtuoso? Sort of like a very talented child genius, whether it's a cellist or whatever, I can't remember. But so there was this agency that went to sort of like music universities to find the appropriate woman based on all of the the kind of like checklist that they were looking for. And this is done, and then she will be enticed, encouraged, paid, offered a lot of money for her to donate her eggs, and it will be very minimized, sort of like risks and the procedure. You can have something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which is very, it's pretty dangerous actually. And there was something that I saw the other day, which I found quite worrying, where a woman she was going through IVF for herself. Sorry, I'm going slightly off topic here, but she was going through IVF for herself. And so she was going through the egg harvesting or the egg retrieval process. And as a result, she actually developed over hyperstimulation syndrome. And this was such a bad case that she had to have, I think it was a kidney and pancreas transplant. So subsequently, she wasn't able to have a child, and she was obviously going through this process for that very reason. So then she went through surrogacy, and then she had a child born through surrogacy, and this is in the UK. So there are significant risks, and we just don't have enough research. It's generally put to the bottom of the pile, and it doesn't benefit clinics. So clinics obviously sell on eggs, so it's of profit to them. So research saying there's a risk of bowel cancer, there's a risk of reproductive cancers, there's a risk to your fertility, it can be a risk to your life. I mean, 2 women in the UK have died from donating their eggs. So, it's not without risks, but it's pretty far down the list.
Thank you, Lexi. I've just been receiving a few messages that chat for some people when they're coming in is disabled to them. So I don't know what you've been receiving, Liz. Have you got questions?
I've got some more questions that have come in to me.
Oh, brilliant. Sorry, as long as they're coming to you, that's great.
Okay.
And
I can't see what anyone else is seeing, but I've got.
That's okay then. I was just a bit worried there for a sec because we've just had a few issues, and obviously, if there is time, we might be able to take a few hands. But if anyone has any questions that don't get answered tonight, please pop them to us. Either to Liz, will collate them, and we will answer those in our next newsletter. We will get to them. It's just a case of whoever got there first. Thank you, Liz. Sorry.
Okay, so this next question is a little bit out of order, but it seems that this might be the right place to ask it. So this is from Ruby Dimelo Steele, who says, are you suggesting that the surrogate mother should be considered the mother of the child in our usual understanding of the idea?
Yes, I am, because in law, as I said, the woman who gives birth is the mother and no other. So in the law in the UK, we understand that if you give birth, you are a mother, you have legal parental rights and parental responsibilities, which is really important. So there's, when a child is born, there is one person, at least one person. Obviously, we there can be other, but there's at least one person who is legally responsible for that child. So obviously if there's abandonment or neglect or any sort of problem or something done to the child, there's somebody who has legal responsibility and parental rights for that child, parental rights and parental responsibility. And putting the law aside, I am suggesting, I do believe that the woman who gives birth is a mother because of biology. So every woman who has been pregnant will understand, and actually those who haven't been pregnant will understand that, there is a mother-baby bond, and that child that is in the womb, not being, a conscious being outside of the body, but having that relationship. And when you are born, you know your mother, you know her voice, you know her heartbeat, you know her gait, and you've experienced her diet. There should be no separation of this. I think if we consider women to be giving birth and to be thinking of them as vessels or incubators or extreme babysitters is another one I've heard. What's the other one I heard? Tummy mummy. I mean, there's lots of language around this that basically dehumanizes a woman. It reduces her to her reproductive function. We don't do this with sperm donors, by the way. And we are separating in language what it means to be a mother and separating the child from their mother, because we're saying it's inconvenient for the adults involved.
Okay, thanks. So here's another question which relates to what you've just been talking about from Harriet Wilder. What do the surrogacy industry have to say about the fact that puppies and kittens aren't removed from their mother for 8 to 12 weeks due to the psychological impact, yet they take these babies away from mum straight away? There have to be terrible long-term psychological impacts.
Yes, I mean, Olivia Morel has spoken of this. I haven't ever seen a surrogacy agency or broker speak about, I think it's called Lucy's Law, or is that how it was more commonly known? But basically, yes, I think it's 8 to 12 weeks. You can't take a puppy or a kitten away from their mother. I've never seen anyone say anything about that. If I'm honest, I wouldn't be able to reference anything to tell you where I've seen that before. I know that there's, animal rights and breeders and laws around and reasons why, they're kept together. The mother and the pup or the kitten are kept together. But we do separate human babies from their human mothers at birth, because it's an arrangement that's been made and it's what the adults have decided, and it's convenient and the law allows it to happen.
Thanks. I have a question here from Sasha Dickinson. There's another one coming from Ruby, but it's about same-sex couples. So okay, we'll get to that, but let's have this one because it's around the same subject we're on now. From my understanding, says Sasha, the proposals say when a surrogate mother withdraws her consent during pregnancy and remains the legal mother on the birth, the intended parents will still be advised to apply for parental orders. Is there any clarity surrounding how the welfare test will be applied in this scenario? From my understanding, the reforms propose using the nothing else will do test from adoption law, but this is meant to be secondary to a full welfare balancing test that doesn't seem to exist in the parental order cases that consistently see welfare as synonymous with the baby being with its biological parents.
I would say that's true, yes. I mean, so there is some acknowledgement of adoption law in the law now and in reform, under reform, but ultimately, if a woman says, okay, so it's up to and including birth, and this can be done as they say in the core report, by voice message or text message. So you could basically send a text message as a surrogate mother giving birth saying, I withdraw my consent, and I'm not going through with this process, and you're experiencing contractions and all of that, okay, up to and including birth. And let's just say that she has the baby and keeps the baby. That wouldn't be where it would end. Obviously, there would be a legal challenge and a court case that would ensue from that, and actually it would be pretty complicated in the hospital. So say, for example, that the commissioning parents are there in the hospital when they receive this text message, either directly from the surrogate mother or from an agency that's been an intermediary, and saying that, the surrogate mother has decided that she's changed her mind. They could be on the ward and waiting to be told, that they're going to be holding their baby. There's also sometimes, what if they're in the room? I mean, it's pretty complicated and difficult to imagine how midwives, they're kind of at the coalface. They're sort of like would have to be dealing with this. And their priority should always be the surrogate mother and the baby, obviously. And there have been agencies that have been speaking to midwives, and they've been getting to the Royal College of Nursing, the Royal College of Midwives, and they've been working with them to sort of like try to have it understood that the commissioning parents are to be included and are sort of part of this team. But the patient is obviously the mother and the child. And there isn't really any sort of provision for any change to the sort of welfare. And then a judge would ultimately then be deciding based on the welfare of the child. There's many a case, there's cases where the surrogate mother has withdrawn and hasn't wanted to go through with it, and the child has gone to the commissioning parents. So, and I don't think that would change under reform. I think it would be made much worse, because the time that she has to change her mind is much reduced, and the power dynamic is still pretty strong. They're still basically the people who've commissioned this child into being. If they have to have a genetic link anyway now and under reform, so then they can say, well, we own the baby. So to answer the previous question as well, if the mother isn't the mother and doesn't have legal rights or parental responsibility, and the commissioning parents do, then of course she's not going to have any legal standing. And actually in the law reform, they split it so that she's got parental responsibility, but not parental rights. And so you separate the two, and then the parental rights are transferred, but you still have parental rights at birth. Do you see what I mean? Like it's really messy. If you split these roles and you split who's doing what and who's got legal standing, a legal relationship with the baby, then it's sort of up for grabs. It's sort of up for discussion.
Okay. Coming back to Ruby's other question, which takes us in a slightly different direction. What are the implications of banning surrogacy for same-sex couples?
I mean, I think for us, we would like to see a global ban, so it's not limited to a same-sex couple. The impact for same-sex couples, I mean, for lesbians, obviously they're a same-sex couple. I'm wondering if Ruby's referring to same-sex male couples, probably, so I'll answer on that principle. Same-sex male couples are obviously able to adopt in this country. They can co-parent and foster. It wouldn't be that they just simply can't have a family. It's just that they wouldn't be able to do it through surrogacy. And there are lesbian couples who have surrogate born children. So there was a case of another elderly couple. It was one woman was in her 60s, another was in her 70s, and they had an egg donor and a sperm donor creating embryos, put one in one Ukrainian woman and another in a different Ukrainian woman, and then both of those Ukrainian women went to Cyprus and then eventually gave birth in northern Cyprus. So they were moving embryos and gametes and women all across borders. And then because there wasn't a genetic link, because they had an egg donor and a sperm donor, and they had no genetic relationship with the child, they couldn't obtain a parental order, and then they adopted the children, and it took 4 years, and the courts tried to prevent this because ultimately they had, you know, gone through this process that was ultimately very exploitative. And when you have 2 women pregnant at the same time, by the way, that's called simultaneous surrogacy. It's more common than you think. Sometimes it's done as a backup. So if one, you know, obviously ends in miscarriage or is stillborn, and there's another one on the way. It's been applied by celebrities mainly, but actually there are couples, I've heard of cases of UK couples doing it as well. And I mean, the impact for same-sex male couples would be the same. If same-sex couples, both male and female, are banned from it and heterosexual couples are allowed, then that would be a disparity, but that's not what I would be campaigning for. I'm campaigning for a global ban for everybody. So it's regardless of what your sexual orientation might be, on the principle that we shouldn't take babies from their mothers at birth and give them to strangers.
Liz, if there's one more question, we could take one more. And whilst I've got everyone here, we've realised again that some people have got issue with chat and they won't know how to contact us. So I'm going to have to say it, that you can use the email for Green Party Women, and that is info@greenpartywomen.org.uk. That's info@greenpartywomen.org.uk. Is that right, everyone? Please correct me. Is that right, Liz? That is our email. Do you have one more question?
Yes, well, I've got a comeback from Ruby.
Okay.
He's saying, I wasn't suggesting same-sex couple only ban, just
Okay.
same-sex couples wouldn't be able to have biological children. That was her point.
Okay. Well, just to respond to that, I mean, lesbian couples would be able to. And if they cope, and if you can have situations where a same-sex female couple and a same-sex male couple have come together in a co-parenting arrangement, so all of the gametes involved in that situation and the pregnancy is all within that group of 4 people, and so all of the children are, you know, one child is related to one mother and one father, and another child is related to the other father and the other mother. So it's not that they wouldn't be able to have biological children, or actually I would say genetic children, but it would be, you know, a matter of obviously doing that in a co-parenting relationship, and lesbian women would be able to have sperm donors, so they would be able to have their genetic children. So it wouldn't be, that's why I split it out in that way, Ruby, just because there's differences in the biology that means that same-sex couples are affected in different ways based on their sex.
There is one more here.
Okay.
Are gay men trying to claim they have sorry, this is from, I haven't got my glasses, Soraya. Are gay men trying to claim they have a right to access to IVF, so the state has to provide a woman for surrogacy under, quote, reproductive equality?
Yes, that's happening, but I would say that it's being done very carefully and cleverly. And I would say, so it's fertility equality, fertility privilege, reproductive justice, IVF for all. And then I saw one article the other day that was quite extreme in its language, and it said that gay men were reproductive refugees, I think was the language used, where they have to sort of go abroad to get babies from surrogate mothers abroad because they are refugees in their inability to reproduce themselves. It's not got to the point where I think it's being suggested that they should have a surrogate mother on the NHS. I've seen that argument in Scotland in the past, and I've seen some discussion of whether the expenses, the so-called reasonable expenses for surrogacy, that should be paid for by the NHS for the surrogate mother. And the argument for that is not one that I agree with, but it's the argument that they would say is that it's so expensive and that, you know, they are infertile because they can't reproduce, so that the NHS should provide this for them. But gay men who, whether they're single or in a couple, they can be sperm donors and they do have children that way. And like I say, there's other means. So it's an argument that isn't, it's put forward in that sense. Yes, it's put forward in that sense. I think if you look at IVF for All and the fertility networks, and you can see in sort of like manifestos what they're asking for, what they're lobbying for. I'm trying to remember all of the names. If I have a quick look at my phone, actually I've got my phone turned off. I think it's the Fertility Network, Fertility Justice, and then there's a couple of others. I'd have to again send them in links, I think, to you, Jess, afterwards. But there are conversations and meetings and lobbying happening in that area, yes.
Okay, thank you. We do have to finish there, I'm afraid, with questions because there are childcare issues, and I'd love Lexi to give bedtime stories tonight to her little ones. I just wanted to finish by, well, thanking everyone for coming tonight and thanking you for some really thought-provoking questions, and also Lexi for giving your time. But it got me thinking earlier today. I saw some discussions with other women, Green Party women. I was trying to think about what it was, sort of, you know, a mini epiphany looking back to why I joined the Green Party in the first place. And it was based on ecology and being connected to the planet and being connected to the physical reality of the world that we live in. And I started thinking in terms of, I'll just look at my notes here because it's quite an emotional sort of thing, is that what I think I'm witnessing, certainly as I get older, and maybe it happens every generation and it just happens, but there's a gradual, what I would call a disembodiment, particularly of women psychologically and physiologically from their bodies. Now, not everyone feels that, but it's certainly something that I witness. And I'm thinking about the 5 things that Object look at, and they look at pornography and sex clubs and prostitution, the gender ideology debate, another fractious issue, surrogacy, and then of course now coming into the fray is transhumanism. And all I see at every stage now, looking back today, is an injection of huge amounts of money are being made, millions and billions, and also pharmaceutical companies are making a huge amount on the backs of desperate people who really, really want children, and on the backs of women who perhaps don't have the same choices as any of us in this room. And I cannot think of anything more, is the word antithetical or the antithesis of Green Party principles and values, which is that connectedness to the physical and biological reality of nature and our bodies and the connectedness of people. And all I'm seeing is a fracture. And what I started to think about surrogacy was that with adoption, you're trying to heal a fracture that was unintentionally created through circumstances beyond most people's control. What I see with surrogacy is an intended fracture that happens even before conception. You are intending to create a fracture, and I never saw it like that before. And I think perhaps you shouldn't have to have a child to feel this. I think everyone can have empathy. But since having my own child 28 years ago, it changed everything in my mind about the connection that I still have with my beautiful girl. And I wouldn't want that changed for anybody unless there are other circumstances. So thank you, because it got me thinking again tonight, and the questions got me thinking. And if there is an appetite to come back, we can do it, everyone, tonight. Just let us know. But if you've got any closing remarks, Lexi, that you'd like to share?
Well, just you talking about that, Jess, and you're completely right. And I was thinking as you were speaking there that Lupron is something that surrogate mothers have when in the period, you know, when they've sort of been implanted and they're trying to sort of make sure the embryo sticks. So Lupron is something that we all know about, I think. And then as you were speaking about that fracture and how, you know, and I came to the subject myself after becoming a mother and sort of going onto a parenting forum, and that's where I learned about surrogacy and the proposals and what was coming. And I don't blame you for thinking that, you know, it's kind of this actually lovely thing between family and friends, because that's how I came to the subject. I read women's magazines. The stories that you would see would be, you know, their sort of lovely happy endings. And now, you know, how many years is it now? So yeah, coming up for 6 years this year. And I've heard so many stories of it being so far removed from that. And you can't look away, you know, once you know something and you see something, you can't unsee it. So I carry on because of those women. And there's more of them than you think. There's more of them than we know of because they can't speak. So I'm not wanting to speak for them. I'd like them to be able to speak for themselves, but I hope to be able to do some of that and then share their stories where that's possible.
Well, thank you again, and for holding a very, very delicate line
Thank you.
between various needs, and for being compassionate in your approach. I think that's really important. And so everyone, if the committee could stay on, Lexi, I'm sure you want to shoot off, and you're very welcome, but if the committee could stay on, just a little debrief about if that's possible. But I wish everyone a really, really good evening. And remember, we are at info@greenpartywomen.org.uk, or obviously there's the website for Stop Surrogacy Now UK. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much, and have a good evening.